I guess it's time we take a look at how we deal with this in the format. What's up YouTube, Duh here from Zephyr War Games, and today I'm going to bring you a range of cards that you're going to want to be looking into or trying to pick up in order for your sideboard or main deck to counteract the new Yugioh cards, because they are going to take tier elements up into a tier 0 format, and they're going to be completely legal from technically today all the way through until maybe early February, unless we get an emergency ban list. I'm going to put all these Yugioh cards up on the screen so you can see what each one of them does, but ultimately what they work around is if cards are sent from your opponent's main deck to the graveyard, you can special summon them, you can banish them from the field or graveyard in order to mill cards from both players' decks, and that's just going to be able to utilise a mill out win con or a deck out win con alongside the ability to trigger all of your tier elements effects, put your fairies back into the deck and go from there. On top of that, it does give the deck easy access to hand traps in the form of Herald of Orange Light. So rather than having to play Gamma, they can play a card like that instead, which will be able to deal with Dimension Shifter, but we will talk about that a little bit later on. Now this video is not all about the Yugioh cards, these are just to say go and research these now, but as a quick breakdown video, what cards should you be looking for, what cards should you be digging out of the bulk, and what cards you should be putting into your main deck or side deck in order to counteract this very annoying deck for the format. So we're going to start off with a range of cards that not all decks can play, but they are cards that will be very utilised for this. So you're going to be looking at straight away Macrocosmo and Dimensional Fissure. Both these cards get rid of the graveyard. All of the brand new Yugioh cards do need to go to the graveyard, so if they are banished instead, it completely null and voids all the effects, as well as being able to deal with the tier elements. The issue is something like DD Crow and even the Bysteel Magma Dragons is not going to be as good to deal with this because it's only going to be one form of interruption, whereas they're going to have plenty of fairies, plenty of mills, and they're always going to be able to hit some form of target. So, when you take out the graveyard, that's when you're going to be looking into Dimension Fissure and Macrocosmo as continuous spells or traps that you can utilise in order to do with that. The biggest issue is, because it affects both players, it does mean that your deck will need to be able to play without the graveyard as well. So let's look at some cards that are a bit more generic that you will be able to utilise, whether it helps your deck or not. So one of the personal favourites that I really like is Different Dimension Grounds. This is a normal trap card. The turn you activate it, all cards that are sent to the graveyard are banished instead. So again, it is a one-turn defissure or Macrocosmo, which can help you because you won't lose all of your card effects. It really depends when you're going to activate it. And that's the biggest issue with a deck like this, is they can trigger with the tier elements during your turn and of course your opponent's turn. So it's very tricky to utilise the best point of when to be flipping something like this. Not to mention, if the deck has the ability to, it will either deck you out turn one, or it will give you the ability that all of your good outs are already banished or in the graveyard, and then you're struggling to pull it all back from the board that they are going to present themselves with. Other cards you might want to be looking at that are going to be more so going first, whether they're going to be in the main deck or the side deck, is stuff like Silent Graveyard. Being able to turn off the graveyard for turn, again, is really, really important and powerful. But because this deck with tier elements can play both during your turn and your opponent's turn, it's something you're going to need a card that can be triggered during both players' turn and in multiple stages, something like Abyss Dweller. Another card as well is Darklaw, but Darklaw is probably more specific to the deck you're trying to play, so it'll be more ideal in Heroes, unless you're going to be playing Master Change 2, which again then means that your deck needs to be dark focused. Some of the very spicy plays, or well, one of the spicy cards that is going up in price right now is Earthshattering Event. This is a continuous spell card that has only had one print, which was back in 2015, and it reads as follows. If a card is sent from your opponent's deck, or any deck I believe, to the graveyard, you can target one card in your opponent's graveyard, put it back into the deck, and if you do, for the remainder of his turn, neither player can send cards from the main deck to the graveyard. So it's incredibly powerful. The issue is it's an if effect, and if it triggers during your turn as turn player priority, it will be Chainlink 1, meaning that if they spin their stuff back with, of course, their tier elements, you'll then not be able to spin the target back into the deck to stop them going from the graveyard. So it's a card that you're going to need to play during going first, and they're going to need to trigger it during their turn. So it basically shuts them down for their turn, less so during your turn, which is a bit of a catch-22. The other one is Dimensional Fortress Weapon. Again, I'm going to put all these cards up on the screen so you can see exactly what they are. This card most recently came out in OTS 13, and it's just a normal summoned monster that basically says neither player can send cards from the main deck to the graveyard. It's a 1700 boss monster, so that's kind of cool. Well, not even a boss monster. It's a 1700 beta, so it's a little bit more difficult to deal with. But of course, a normal summon of a Shiren or a Rhino Heart with a field spell will be able to get rid of it. But it does mean they'll need to conduct their battle phase, and they'll need to get rid of your monster in order to do so. It then also comes down to the fact that you will need to have the capabilities of, without being able to search it, unless you're playing something like Small World, to be able to normal summon and then still be able to continue to make your plays or build your board with it. So let's look at the cards that are going to be useful for going both first, second, or turn 0. It really doesn't matter. The only two cards I can consistently think of that will be good, that can be utilised, is of course Dimension Shifter and Neko Kingcat. I believe that's the exact words. Again, I'll put these up on the screen. Now, Dimension Shifter has just had a reprint in the Crystal Beast structure deck, so everyone should be able to get access to it. The issue is, again, quite like D-Fissure and Macrocosmo, is it will affect both players. You need to be able to play your turn and during your opponent's turn without utilising your graveyard. And if you're able to do that with something like Exorcistus or the Casatrilar, you're going to be able to cause your opponent a heck of a lot of issues. But then again, you'll be looking at what else you need to do. On top of that as well, you will be having to activate your Dimension Shifter with no cards in the graveyard, and that's where I would argue that you probably want to combo off something like Dimension Shifter with the Dimensional Fortress Weapon, because they're both darks, so you can, in theory, and I'll need to check their other stats, but there would be a way through Small World where you can bridge the gap to go from, obviously you won't want to go anything to D-Shifter because you would have Small World in the graveyard, but you could use a dead D-Shifter and go all the way into the Dimension Fortress Weapon, and that's pretty much going to say no milling and everything's going to get banished anyway. So you've got double blockade of everything you need to deal with, which is really, really cool. The other card is the Neko Kingcat. Now this one is out in OTS 20 as a super rare. It's only ever had one print prior to that, and that is as a common. And it reads as follows: that if this card is sent from the main deck to the graveyard via your opponent's card effects, which of course all of the fairy cards do, it will then end the turn. So it's really, really important, but again, it's one of them cards where if you open up all three of them, oh, nightmare. If your opponent doesn't mill any of them, nightmare. Or as soon as they do, that's when you need to make sure they don't have a Herald of the Orange Light, because they'll then be able to go, okay, cool, chain it, deal with it, negate it, stop it. The exact same with D-Shifter. The issue is you will be able to burn through their hand advantage, which could be quite useful. The only other way that you can deal with something like this is if you are playing a deck that naturally wants their cards in the graveyard or will be able to get additional triggers. Now the main ones, of course, right now are Tier Elements, but you can also look at stuff like Infernoids. You can go to a 60 card build of Infernoids. Why worry about that grass that's greener when your opponent is going to mill your deck for you? Bonus! Off the back of that as well, you could be looking at something like Zombies. Now, all of these decks I'm going to be rattling off you, or that I did rattle off you, are not tier contenders. They are just going to be decks that will be able to benefit the most from a mill out type style deck, and again, you want to be looking at 60 card decks. You want to try and make sure that the mill out doesn't happen, because even then the deck can still play, it still produces a very powerful board. The only win con is not to deck out, so it still provides issues that way. It can recur its own resources. It puts up a very strong and powerful board, and even if you wanted to go, okay, Mystic Mine, I'm going to sit here and wait, you're going to be milled out so much already by the time you get to activate that Mystic Mine that you're not going to be able to really deck your opponent out. They're just going to deck you out first under your own Mystic Mine, which is terrible. So as you can see, this is going to cause a lot of issues for the upcoming format. I mean, we do have a YCS this weekend in America. I'm not too sure exactly when it is off the top of my head, so apologies for that. But it will be interesting to see how this deck kind of operates. We'll see some different variations. And because it is the first time this deck is going to be in the TCG, I would not be surprised if it starts to evolve and adapt coming forward. But just be prepared. Your opponent is going to try to deck you out, and that is something you need to be well aware of, and it is something that you also need to be prepared for, which is why I presented you with these list of cards. Thank you so much for watching. If you do have any questions, by all means, please put them in the comments down below. If I missed out any other cards, again, also please put them down in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to go over them and add them to a future video. Keep in mind as well that something like Earthshattering Event and Dimensional Fortress Weapon will start to creep up in price. Like the Earthshattering Event is already like a £10 to £15 card on its own, which is... But now is the time to go and grab the OTS 13 commons or dig out from your bulk if you need to for Dimensional Warrior. You want to be looking at D-shifters if your deck can utilize it, and then you want to be looking at macrocosmos, D-fissures, everything like that to try and stop your opponent from going off and then milling your entire deck out. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share the whole 9 yards. Till next time, as absolutely always, stay safe, and of course, happy dueling!